Republican Donald Trump shocks the world and confounds the experts by winning the U.S. presidential election, defeating Democrat Hillary Clinton. In a special post-election Africa 54, we'll analyze the results and ask what's next. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. In one of the greatest political upsets in the U.S. political history, Republican Donald Trump defeated Democrat Hillary Clinton early Wednesday and will become the 45th president of the United States in January. Trump stunned the favored Clinton by winning several key states that traditionally vote Democratic, sending shockwaves around the world. VOA national correspondent Jim Malone has more from Washington.
It was a scene few could imagine just a few hours earlier. Donald Trump, trailing in the polls for much of the campaign, emerging victorious in a presidential result that stunned the nation and the world.
I've just received a call from Secretary Clinton. She congratulated us, it's about us, on our victory. And I congratulated her and her family on a very, very hard-fought campaign. I mean, she fought very hard.
Trump quickly moved to strike a note of conciliation after a long and bitter campaign that has divided the country.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. Have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people.
Trump also had a message for leaders in countries abroad, many of whom no doubt had expected a Clinton victory just a few hours earlier.
I want to tell the world community that while we will always put America's interests first, we will deal fairly with everyone, all people and all other nations. We will seek common ground, not hostility, partnership, not conflict.
It fell to campaign chairman John Podesta to address disappointed supporters who were expecting to celebrate at a New York convention hall.
I know you've been here a long time, and it's been a long night, and it's been a long campaign. But I could say we can wait a little longer, can't we?
Republicans also retained control of both the Senate and the House of Representatives. Trump won key battleground states including Florida, Ohio, North Carolina, and even Wisconsin, which last voted Republican in 1984. Trump won with a surge of support from white working-class voters, says expert David Schultz on Skype.
And what Trump has been very good at doing is bringing out non-traditional voters, which are hard to figure out in terms of polling if they're going to show up. Second, there's been what I call sort of the enthusiasm gap. The people who like Trump really like Trump and are turning out to vote. The people who support Clinton aren't quite as enthusiastic.
Trump now prepares for a presidential transition and an inauguration in January that even some of his supporters doubted would ever happen.
Well, joining us live from New York with more on Donald Trump's surprising win is VOA election correspondent Mary Alice Salinas. And Mary Alice, we want to first go back to last night. We know Clinton is speaking right now, but tell us about that acceptance speech and what things felt like in New York.
It was, you felt the momentous moment. A lot of the supporters were really reacting very well to this sort of conciliatory tone that Mr. Trump took that night. So there was a lot of welcome reaction there. The jubilation is pretty hard to describe. It just escalated throughout the evening. And so there was There wasn't the sense of shock, I think, that you saw around the nation. A lot of the supporters there were saying, we knew this was there. We didn't believe the polls. We saw the support, and they figure this is a historic moment that will be looked at for many, many years to come.
And a very different tone, right? From a man who, for all those months, people expected to be kind of always hard and brash, but sounding so different, right?
Well, he said that he was going to bring the country together, and that is something that everybody's turning to right now, around the world as well as in this country. So already, President Obama this morning gave him a call, offered his congratulations. He is expected to come to the White House on Thursday, and this White House has been preparing for the transition the whole time, and the president has said, no matter who it is, we're going to do the best we can to make sure that there's a smooth and peaceful transition of power. So there's a lot to talk about. A lot of people around the world are looking to see how, in fact, Mr. Trump is going to act based on the comments on the road, on the campaign trail. Some say very divisive and very worrisome to leaders all across the world, from the Asia Pacific to Europe to Latin America. So there's a lot that still needs to be determined. He needs to work on putting together the transition team. That's no small thing. My understanding is that Clinton's team actually was further along in that process. So there's a lot on Mr. Trump's plate this morning.
And very quickly, on the streets of New York, we know that was a stronghold of Hillary Clinton. What was the mood as you moved around?
Well, it's interesting. This morning on the way here, there was a huge crowd at the hotel where some of the media are staying, and there's a huge long line. It was a very somber crowd. They were there to support their candidate as she gave remarks after this stunning defeat last night. It was much more subdued than the crowd I was around last night, of course, but the crowd was huge. Media was lined up all around this hotel, police as well. So I think everyone is still trying to digest what happened. And it's going to take a long time to figure it all out.
Indeed.
But the voters have spoken. The voters have spoken, and then it's onward.
And the message is clear. Thanks a lot, Maria-Lace Salinas. Thank you very much. Well, Maria-Lace Salinas reporting from New York there. Now, joining us now to discuss Donald Trump's stunning victory is VOA national correspondent Jim Malone, whose election recap we just had a moment ago. And back with us today is Washington-based African political analyst Amira Woods. What a shocker. Amira and Jim, welcome.
Hi, Vincent.
Yeah, let me start with you, Amira. First, how did you respond and react to this when you finally kind of woke up to this reality?
Well, we stayed up and were dismayed. I think it's the word, dismayed as we saw the results. And quite frankly, there's a lot of unknowns. What we do know is that it's Clinton who has won the popular vote. Trump has won the electoral vote, and that's what counts. The voters have spoken, as your reporter so well said, right? And there's a lot in terms of who will be in critical positions that impact the world, who will be and what will be the type of policies right from the start in the first 100 days. I mean, there's a lot to be seen.
And we'll talk about that a little more. But Jim, let's go back to the question of the electoral vote, the electoral college vote, and the popular vote. So many of our viewers sometimes get really confused. What does that mean? I mean, Hillary gets a popular vote. Trump gets the electoral vote.
Well, it's a confirmation of our process, which is that the popular vote does not elect the president. What elects the president is accumulating state-by-state electoral college votes. Now, that's based on the population of the state. And Americans have made their peace with this. And in this election, it's actually going to be easier to look at it than, say, the 2000 election, where there was a few hundred votes in Florida that separated Al Gore from George W. Bush. What we saw here was a clear, resounding message through a number of what we call the battleground states, upper Midwest, states from Pennsylvania west through Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, the industrial heartland of the United States. This is where Trump made his play for support, and he got his voters out in big numbers. A lot of those races were fairly close, but he won a lot of those states. So you had a cascading effect that allowed him to win the Electoral College vote, and it will be sort of a footnote that Hillary Clinton is leading in the popular vote.
Yes. I want to stay with you for just a second. The question of polls, Donald Trump kept saying, these phony polls. Can people take those polls seriously anymore?
Well, so it reminds me of a line from a movie where you hear somebody say, you got a lot of explaining to do. Yeah, I mean, most of the pollsters, the election experts, the pundits were wrong. A lot of them are admitting that this morning here in the United States. And there'll be a tremendous review to try to figure out why. And herein lies some of the secrets of why we were shocked, I think, is looking at who came out for Donald Trump, why we didn't know about them ahead of time or why they didn't appear on the radar. This is an important part. It's part of our democracy, and it's, to a great extent, white, working class, many of them older voters, flexing their political muscle. In a way, it's the inversion election from 8 years ago.
This is clear, right? So I think what happened with the Obama phenomena is that Obama extended the electorate, particularly to progressives, to people of color, to young people. And quite frankly, that Obama strength was lost this time around. And instead, what you had was Trump expanding the electorate to primarily white, male, rural. So race was a key element.
It was key. But that those also were thinking history will be made again. President Obama became the first black person to become president. But people hoped that Hillary Clinton will become the first female president. And we're watching now, on the screen here. Question is that some people may ask, did the woman vote fail Hillary Clinton here?
Well, I think what you had was an electorate that wanted change, that demanded change.
Hold on. Let's first watch Hillary Clinton give a... Okay, go ahead. I thought that we're getting, some feed from her. But
so ultimately, this electorate wanted change. Had it, this was an electorate that was thirsting for a Bernie Sanders, even an Elizabeth Warren. Had it been a candidate that inspired the voters to that degree, having that inspirational message of this is the vision of the future. I think it would have been a different result today, right? But we have to, as we are all saying, look forward, right? Not what led us to this point, but now that we're at this point, what does that mean for people of color in the U.S., for immigrants in the U.S., but also what does it mean for the rest of the world? And to what extent does the world now have to dig deep to find hope and to strategize around issues like climate change, issues like the global economy and what it means for people's daily lives? I mean, this is ultimately our task for today.
Indeed. Well, Amira and Jim, we'll continue our election discussion a bit later. But now it is time for a short break. Still to come on Africa 54. How the world is reacting to Donald Trump's victory. We'll be right back.
With the gloves, very carefully.
Well, in Wednesday's business report, financial markets worldwide reacted sharply to the surprise Donald Trump win. Joining us from New York with the potential winners and losers and Trump presidency's Africa 54's Jill Malandrino. Welcome, Jill.
Good morning. So there are a handful of sectors that are projected to outperform. One of the most obvious is healthcare, as we saw in early trade. Trump has stated his desire to repeal the ACA, or what's known as Obamacare, and re-importation from other countries, but controlling drug prices is unlikely to be a priority for him. He is for deregulation across the board in general. Stocks like Merck, Biogen, Celgene, Regeneron, they all stand to benefit. Now, keeping with the theme of deregulation, energy and financial stocks could also outperform, and we're seeing that in trade. Trump has promised less regulation on drilling and expansion of drilling. The segment of the industrial sector that services the energy group like GE, Baker Hughes, that deal that was just announced 2 weeks ago. Trump has indicated he would like to roll back bank regulations, including the Dodd-Frank financial crisis legislation that Clinton pledged to strengthen. So I would look at stocks like Citigroup, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Morgan Stanley to uptick. Now, just this morning, Jefferies, a sell-side research firm, upgraded mining and steel stocks, so Freeport-McMoRan, U.S. Steel, AK Steel, Nucor, as Trump has pledged to invest significantly in infrastructure, which bodes well for copper and other mined commodities. Now, protectionism is also expected to rise. The U.S. is already short steel, and falling imports will improve domestic pricing power for those stocks.
Well, now let's talk about losers. I would imagine anything related to trade will be impacted, right?
That's exactly right. Auto suppliers were downgraded this morning at Bank of America to underperform on the Trump win, citing risks with respect to trade and NAFTA in particular, because dismantling or restructuring of NAFTA would have far-reaching repercussions for the auto industry. As of now, about 5 million vehicles are imported and exported between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada. So companies like Delphi, Magna International, Borg Warner, and Lear, they're examples of stocks that have the most exposure to NAFTA.
Now, what do you expect will happen in the market overall? Perhaps a Brexit-like reaction?
I do. Markets tend to assume the worst and react immediately, and that appears to be happening. Just look how much we rallied overnight, almost 100 points on the S&P. There will be significant pressure for Trump to start to clarify some of his policy intentions, after which we may see a recovery as we did with Brexit. And at the end of the day, corporate America is very adaptable. We spoke about this last week. Over the past 80 years, many disruptive policies have come and gone. We've been through periods of recession, high inflation, interest rate spikes, Federal Reserve rate hike cycles, wars, terrorism, etc. Through it all, Vincent, S&P 500 companies have grown profits by an average of 8% annually.
Jill, thank you very much. Well, last night's election is being called the Earth's most watched election since World War II, the results of which are expected to completely transform American policy and Africa's position in the world. Now, VOA's Europe correspondent Luis Ramirez has our report.
For Londoners, the shock news smacked of that morning back in June when they learned, despite poll predictions, Britain had voted to leave the European Union. A leap into the unknown is how leaders across the world and the markets see it. The dollar dipped in early trading, given Donald Trump's comments during the campaign that he will tear up trade agreements and offer no guarantees to members of NATO who do not pay their share.
What they see now is one candidate who seems to stand for a completely different view of America's role in the world. And I mean completely different, who repudiates rather specifically the alliance framework, the NATO framework in particular, who has repudiated America's commitment to the liberal trade system that America created, the sort of open globalization America promoted, that seems to be in some ways more sympathetic to America's historic enemies like Russia than it is to Europe.
China has reason to worry. Trump has targeted Beijing's trade practices, threatening to slap 45% tariffs on Chinese imports.
There's a whole range of sort of relatively outlandish statements that Trump said during his campaign that, if they were to come to pass, could create some pretty dramatic business and economic consequences in the region.
Trump won on an America First platform. For Africa, analysts say that means expectations are realistic and tempered.
I think that what Africa has to do is to prepare for the worst-case scenario, which would mean that the America under Donald Trump would focus first on American national interests and not necessarily on global interests, and not necessarily, therefore, on African interests. And if there was a time that Africa should start thinking of African solutions to African problems. The time is now.
World leaders watched this election closely, and the big question now is, what role will the U.S. play in the world?
Is the U.S. going to disengage from the world? And we've seen a fair amount of disengagement from the U.S. in the last few years. And what's happening in Syria is partly a result of that. Is the U.S. going to disengage, or is the U.S. going to re-engage with the world?
Trump said his administration will deal fairly with the world and seek common ground, not hostility. With the uncertainty of a new day also comes the hope that a dramatic departure from the established world order could bring new opportunities and maybe some positive surprises. Luis Ramirez, VOA News, London.
Well, let's return to our discussion with VOA national correspondent Jim Malone and Washington-based Africa political analyst Amira Woods. And of course, there we'll talk about America's policy and America's position in the world. Jim, just briefly, you know, people listen a lot to what is said on the campaign trail. Mm-hmm. But looking at, the reality on the ground, you've covered these elections over, many years, and you've seen what presidents accomplish. We know they have immense power. But how much, say, of what President-elect Trump has promised, is he realistically able to shape or influence the change in the short term? And how much of it may be a little more difficult over the long term?
Well, of course, we don't know. I mean, what we do know is when presidents come in, many of them believe they have a mandate to act. Many of them cite their program that supporters rallied around. This is what they do. They point to the political capital that was given to them by voters. Therefore, they believe they owe those voters action. But here's the unknown about Donald Trump. He was not tethered strongly to one party or the other. He had his issues with Republicans, who now, by the way, have retained control of the Senate and House. That could be a good thing, but it could also set up for more tensions. So will Trump go ahead with plans to build a wall with Mexico? What will he do about immigration, Muslim immigration in particular? How will he go about repairing the national wounds from this campaign? Can he even do that, given his propensity for divisive rhetoric? Mm-hmm. A lot of questions here. But when they come in, presidents generally want to act to show those loyal supporters, and they came out of the woodwork for him in all these states, that he's going to do their bidding. Yeah.
But now, Amira, listening to part of his speech, actually, if you listen to all of it, there's that tone, a changed tone, a kind of a reconciliation, and he's talking about bringing everybody together for immigrants and for all those other groups who felt threatened if President if Trump becomes president. Do you think that kind of tone helps people calm down and perhaps look to the future rather differently without so much fear and worry?
I don't think the issue is calming down. I think the issue is organizing. And I think what you will see is that on the left, particularly black and brown young people, they were outside in large numbers outside the White House even before the President-elect Trump made his acceptance speech, right? So I believe that the organizing in the streets is going to be intense in this country.
But what does
there will
it
be
achieve?
a pushback.
What does it achieve?
Well, I think what will happen is that there will be a real pressure to take back Congress in the next 2 years, and that those forces, particularly those young Bernie Sanders supporters, they will be in force demanding that their voice be heard 2 years from now in the electoral cycle. But they will also be in the streets holding up a different vision of the world, that those movements, Black Lives Matter, that have gained such ground around the world, they will continue to find their footing and to find ways to express both their vision for America and for the world. So on issues, ultimately, like the economy, which touches all communities in the U.S. and around the world, those forces will apply pressure, not for the rich to get richer,
just as
but
they have
for
been
the real
applying pressure. These are some of the same issues people have been fighting for even for the last 8 years, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And on issues like, peace and security, countering terrorism, there will also be a pushback because I think fundamentally the U.S. is tired of war. So if you have now a return of, and some say it may be like Newt Gingrich, who is the Secretary of State, and a real return to some of the forces that were the hawks, right, from the U.S., I think there will be a pushback against that, both in terms of the costs in treasure and also the costs in lives in the future.
Yes. Now, Jim, I mean, Trump gets elected, and it comes in with the benefit, of course, the House. He has the Senate. He has everything. Does that make life easier for him, especially for his first promise of undoing Obamacare?
It should make it more doable in a sense. But Democrats have enough seats in the Senate that they can make life difficult for the president to come in because they can block things. We knew, based on the outcome of the election, about half the country was going to be unhappy. Yeah. Most people following the polls thought it was going to be the Trump followers. This is an unexpected shock to the Democratic Party. I think there's going to be a lot of self-reflection in the Democratic Party now. Perhaps some second guessing. Did we nominate the right candidate? Was Hillary Clinton too flawed from the start to be the standard bearer? So there's going to be a lot of discussion on that going forward in the party.
How about the Republican Party? Some just literally kept away from him. Some very openly said they have nothing to do with him. What happens to that party?
It's a kind of a mystery to me, too. It's going to be a work in progress. Yeah. You just saw Paul Ryan today commending Trump for winning, but they've had their issues. Yeah. Ryan may not be even able to return as House Speaker since the conservative bloc there has grown in strength and may want to change him out for someone else. So the whole political calculation in this country, and the world knows this, has been thrown off.
But it's not just the U.S. We have to really recognize that there is this push from the right. It's, it's places like the Brexit where you see the push from the right. It's Brazil, it's Denmark. It's really, recent elections have shown the strength of the right. But I believe that there will be a pushback from the left, and that you will have this counterbalancing of forces that will shift political discourse and will also shift the destinies of particularly the young generation that is demanding real change.
For those in Africa, you think it's time to heed that counsel from that gentleman we saw, Olo, saying it's time for Africa to focus on getting their own solutions rather than waiting for who becomes the U.S. president and how that will benefit our country?
Without a doubt. When it comes to Africa, honestly, whether Republican or Democrats, Africa has been on the wrong end of the picture. If it comes in terms of trade, Africa has seen unequal trade. Even with the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, it hasn't brought much growth nor opportunity to Africa, right? It's benefited the narrow few, often U.S. corporations. So a rebalance is needed for Africa to really set its own agenda. And I believe that when you see things like this climate change issue, where Africa has taken the lead, it's areas like that where we can continue to take the lead for the whole world.
Thank you both. Well, Amira and Jim, we do appreciate your insights. Our thanks to VOA National Correspondent Jim Malone and Washington-based Africa political analyst Amira Woods for joining us today on Africa 54. Well, that's our show for today. Now be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. For more news, tune in to VOA's evening radio show, Africa News Tonight, at 1800 UTC. And in the mornings to Daybreak Africa between 0300 and 0600 UTC. That's Monday through Friday. Thanks for watching. And from all of us in Washington, have a good night.
The Voice of America today is a window in which we have to see delivering the messages for contacting the people wherever they are. And Albanian people, as people of a small country, need to have such and deserve to have such information from the United States and from all around the world. So it's a bridge. Voice of America, it's a bridge between entire world and Albanian citizens.